Thank you, Joy. It's my pleasure to join you here today, and a real pleasure to sing congregational singing again after not having done that for a while. Thank you for playing for us. Can everybody hear me okay? So when Joy asked me to talk about my Mennonite background and its connection with my work as a poet, I thought about a few aspects that might carry over. But there is one particular strand that, of that connection that comes to mind with a little more power than others, and that is silence. It was a very real presence in the Mennonite community I grew up in, and I think it's a real presence in poetry as well, maybe in some defining ways in both of those things. It's part of poetry's pull, the silence between the lines. What's left unsaid is often the most moving element of a poem. As Joy said, I grew up in a Russian Mennonite farming community on the outskirts of Niagara. In the 60s and 70s, most of the people in my church community and many in the wider Mennonite community that lived in the area had fled Russia, either in the early 1920s after the revolution, as my father's family did, or at the end of the Second World War, as my mother's family did. For those of you unfamiliar with that history, the Mennonites lived in what is now central and south-central Ukraine for about 150 years. They were German-speaking people. Their roots were in Northern Europe, but they settled in Russia when they were offered land, freedom from military conscription, freedom to practice their religion, and freedom to organize their own education system with their German language. But they kept to themselves. They were quite self-sustaining, and the colonies that they lived in, which were interconnected, prospered for the most part until the revolution. Many of these Russian Mennonites, and the name is a geographical one more than anything else, many of them who settled in the Niagara area had experienced violence. They'd lived through not only the revolution, but also the Holodomor and the longer years of famine in the Soviet Union. Then there were the purges as Stalin tried to rid the country of religion as well as ethnic minorities. Many had family members and friends who had disappeared into the vast system of the Gulag. There was repeated displacement, poverty, refugee camps for those who came over after the Second World War, and the long wait for emigration. When they arrived in Canada, they were grateful and worn, and they looked for each other to rebuild their communities. During those first decades, and these are the decades when I grew up in the 60s and 70s, I see it as quite an intense pocket of time for the Mennonites. They were immigrants, so that is usually a challenge. Plus, they were carrying the great weights of their past experience with the things I talked about. But also there was a deep fear of, which was rooted in their past, but also a fear of being influenced by the world around them. The social upheavals of the 60s and 70s, they were worried for the younger generation and how this, and the influence of the world on them. So they kept even, I think they kept even more rigidly to themselves. It's not surprising then that much was left unsaid. But I don't see that silence as a wall of silence. It wasn't sterile sterile or impenetrable. It was more like a landscape, in the sense it surrounded us. It had changeable features, the terrain varied, but it was always there. It wasn't that we didn't experience joy and humor and storytelling. We did, and there was certainly plenty of music as a counterpoint, wonderful music. But there were certain things that were only hinted at, not explained. There were emotional contexts left out entirely. And always, always, there was this sense of all the presences around the periphery that haunted our gatherings, the presences of those who didn't make it out, who weren't there to tell their stories. I'd like to read a poem in which I tried to capture that sense of the others who weren't there. This is from Ordinary Hours, and it's called To Adam Zagajewski. He was a Polish poet. You might know of him because his poem in praise of a mutilated world was circulated quite a bit around 9/11. To Adam Zagajewski. I read your poems and remember two old people in their quiet house on William Street, next to two more people in their quiet house, and two or three more down the street and on the other streets and others still. No one spoke on Sunday afternoons as the sun warmed the tables and books and coffee steamed in little cups. But as night came, with its shadows and sighs, the walls moved in like long-dead friends, and fathers, sisters, sons, and there were careful words said as if the saying were another kind of loss, as if words could be the ashes of a heart wind-blown. Afterward, another pot of coffee went around. The old people prayed and waved to us going out the door and to the car. The others from the other houses leaving too. All of us driving into the soft rain of our new lives. Our new lives. Our, meaning us, the younger generation, who didn't live through the Russian experience and who were influenced by the upheavals of the 60s and 70s, even as isolated as we were. I wonder sometimes if that's also part of the silence, the sharing of the survivors sharing their stories risk losing some of that authenticity as the stories are retold in voices that are a little bit farther from the origin of the stories. My sister and I have a memory of visiting our grandmother, and her brother lived next to them, next door to her. And we asked about this brother-sister relationship. We said, you know, you must have such a bond between you. You've lived together for so many years. You went through so much together. And my grandmother said, well, he gets the mail. The Mennonites I grew up among valued not only faith in God and commitment to the community and the church, but self-discipline and restraint, hard work, simple living. It's not what you say, we were told, but what you do that shows what you believe in. Words, in a way, were regarded as superficial, like the tip of an iceberg. Everything substantial exists underneath the surface. Best, therefore, to devote yourself to work, practical, helpful work. And work, of course, was a way for them to cope with the past. I tried to capture that emphasis in a poem that's part of the series that Joy read from. It's called Long Thread, Lazy Girl. What goes around comes around, they say, as they hang the sheets on the line to dry. As they bend over the quilts, moving their needles in and out, they say, long thread, lazy girl. As they punch down the dough in tubs, they shake their heads and say, 6 days shalt thou work. Scrubbing floors, darning socks, picking beans, they say and say again the words and nothing more. And the shoes are polished, the Sunday shirts ironed and hung, the bread baked, the gardens hoed, the hems taken down and stitched. Be separate, they say, work and pray, as they watch me from the row of spindly poplars at the edge of the cemetery, just past the thin wire fence you can hardly see from here, after which the orchard bends along the rise and curves off over the next one, out of sight, there, where they stand in a group, just there, in a little wind that moves the leaves across their faces. Leaving things unsaid lends itself so well to poetry, not only because of a poem's condensed form, that packed-in quality, but also because poetry is a way to get at something through language that might be beyond language, a core of meaning hinted at between the lines. If we allow the silence around the poem to carry what can't quite be articulated, the poem's moment has room to expand and reverberate, like the pebbles here. It has room to shimmer. I like to think that the poem's dignity remains intact because of that spaciousness around it. That notion of getting as close as possible using language points to something that I think is underneath all of this, and something we all know at some level, and that is the helplessness of language, the helplessness of words. We've all probably experienced that at some point or another in our lives, when words are inadequate, they don't do enough. They're helpless to deal with what needs to be dealt with. They get close, we meander around using our tools of words, but in the end, it's sometimes not enough. Poetry accepts that helplessness. It okays that vulnerability, even celebrates it through metaphor, through imagery, and through brevity. Poems invite us to trust silence and its ability to clarify meaning sometimes by making meaning ever so slightly evasive. We have to seek it out sometimes. Metaphor, imagery, they bear a lot of weight, but sometimes, maybe, silence bears more. I can't leave out music here, so I have to tell you about the piano teacher who once told me that a musical rest, a rest in music, is active. Think through the rest, she said. The musical tension has to move through the rest to carry the shape of the phrase. She said, the rest is not nothing. We can think of silence, whether between the lines or between people, in the same way, as active, as alive. Its reverberations ripple outward as far as you can see. To return to the idea of silence as a landscape, I'd like to end by reading a poem from Cloud Physics called Lekwangan Horizon. Even before silence, it's the grand flatness that draws me to your definition of geography. Take me with you. Let me follow the continuous calm of your line, your long, long nerve. If you had a voice, it would be as old as the midden shell of this cove, a low vibration at the baritonic center of the past. Gulls gleam, darts of light that fire off from your edges to join whatever moves. Thank you.
Thank you.